This is The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction which questions the nature of reality. The zodiacal light is very faint, and so are we, from hunger, a hunger for the stars we can never reach. Yes, it is faint, and so are our hopes, but that doesn't matter if we enjoy the standing and reaching, on the shoulders of our friends, on a ladder, on chairs piled on chairs. We are nearer the stars that way. The zodiacal light is a cone of glow that extends from the horizon and along the constellations of astrology. It is a false dawn, but any dawn is better than none. Aries. I had never taken astrology seriously, and in many ways I still don't. But Octavia was good at changing the minds of men. She dressed in a very anachronistic way, but the eyes that saw her soon came to believe that modernity is overrated. She insisted that stars really did influence our lives. They also control what happens to inanimate objects. "Don't be absurd," I protested. She swished the hem of her toga and smirked. "What zodiac signs are computers?" I shrugged at the question. "Aries, of course, the ram," as if this was enough. "I don't believe you." Later we went for a walk in the park. It was a spring day and the sunlight pushed through the branches of the trees like honey. I bathed in the glow, but Octavia pulled my sleeve and soon we were running towards the lake. She wanted to hire a boat and row across to the other side, so I said, "What will you be doing while I work the oars?" "Playing music," she replied. I frowned at this because she had brought no instruments with her. We selected a rowing boat and clambered inside. The attendant cast off a rope. I pulled on the oars and we glided towards the center of the lake. A mist rose unexpectedly from the cool waters, and it was so thick I could see nothing, not even Octavia, who sat facing me on the wooden bench. I kept rowing. The mist cleared, and now I saw that she had a large drum between her knees and two thick drumsticks to beat it with. At the same time, I felt a coldness around my ankles. I was shackled to my bench. My chains rattled as I tugged at them. "Don't stop," she said. Then she began to beat the drum with powerful strokes. An instinct compelled me to take up the oars again and resume rowing. I rowed in time to her rhythm. Ahead of us, another boat came into view, an easy target. Octavia increased the tempo of her playing. Her toga slipped from her shoulders, and I could almost taste her bare olive skin. Her perspiration glittered like jewels on her forehead and on her full lips, each droplet containing a tiny rainbow. I strained to pull the oars as hard as I possibly could. Ramming speed. Ah, that ram again. So boats at war were also born under the sign of Aries. That made a certain amount of sense. I saw that the enemy boat contained a businessman who was operating a laptop computer. He was being rowed by a man in the uniform of a chauffeur. We would sink them both. It was early afternoon, and the Empire was thriving. Beneath our boat I was aware of sunken vessels and broken computers, and also the bones of other men, all entangled with weeds and kissed by fish. What sign are fish born under? I didn't need to ask. The bones poked through holes in rotten wool cardigans, and that was the important thing. Woolen clothes dyed a softly glowing golden colour in the vats of my nostalgia. Taurus. "What sign do you think the Minotaur is?" This was an unexpected question from above. I turned my head and saw him 3 floors above, leaning out of his window. I was watering the flowers in their boxes on the balcony, and I stood up slowly and stretched. Then I paid serious attention to the question, and finally said, "Taurus." He nodded. It was the obvious answer, but his nod was ironic, and it was clear he was disagreeing with me. It occurred to me that maybe the body of the Minotaur and his head would have different birthdays and be born under 2 different signs, but I was in no mood for riddles and shrugged. Do you suppose he was attracted to women or cows? I beg your pardon? The Minotaur. Were his amorous desires determined by his human mind or his bovine physicality? I can't work it out. You seem very interested in the details of his life. Don't be absurd, he never lived. Yes, he was a myth only. Nonetheless, he was born under the sign of Taurus. But that's what I said earlier. Oh, did you? I misheard. I thought you said Taurus, Taurus, which, as we both know, is a geometrical shape and not a zodiac sign. My neighbour was a joker. Of this I was certain now. I wondered why we hadn't interacted until this moment. I spent a lot of time on my balcony, and he must have seen me there. I leaned on the railings and looked down on the city. The old alleys and narrow streets were like a maze. The thread that would lead a lost traveller out again was made from air, only the wind. It was perfectly possible for the Minotaur to have escaped the labyrinth by chance, from wandering at random, and in this case Theseus would have found it empty when he ventured inside. But, for the sake of saving face, his story wouldn't change. Nobody could dispute that he slew the creature. Yet the monster was free, making his way in a world where he must always be alone. No woman could want him, nor any cow. Never settling down, he would voyage to the edge of the known world, and who can say what he would do when he reached it? Sit on his haunches and wait, I guess. My neighbour had a man's head, not that of a bull, so he couldn't be the Minotaur, as I briefly suspected when he asked me a third question. Who does he support in a bullfight, the beast or the matador? And I said, the answer depends less on the fact he's a hybrid than on his sense of justice. Meaning what exactly? Anyone with a sense of justice supports the bull. I am his descendant, you see. How is that feasible? Somewhere on this remarkable planet of ours he must have met a woman with a cow's head. Over many generations the bovine aspect's weakened. All that remains is my unusual stomach. I don't complain. Before I could raise an objection, he added wistfully, a shame I don't exist. Gemini. They were twins, and they went down the street arm in arm, and I never saw either of them without the other. Absolutely identical in appearance, of course, but one was on roller skates, and the other wore just ordinary shoes, and had to run to keep up with her sister. I would sit at the cafe terrace, and they would pass over my shadow, one rolling and the other loping, and I wasn't sure whether to feel amused or disturbed. Not once did I attempt to speak to them. It would have felt dissolute. I merely sipped my coffee and watched them recede into the distance. When I stood up from my seat later, I noticed that my shadow had trouble freeing itself from the pavement, as if it had been pressed into the slabs, and it took a wrench of my shoulders to prise it loose. This happened every time, and I got into the habit of shrugging theatrically before departing the cafe, and then setting off along a road that was at a tangent to the one the sisters had taken. If I didn't shrug to unstick it, but just walked away, perhaps it would snap completely off at the point where it met my feet. I was reluctant to risk so odd an eventuality. Yet there's probably no more effective way of keeping a favourite chair free at a cafe than by leaving one's shadow alongside. Unlike a coat, nobody's going to steal the thing. But I couldn't bear to forsake my shadow by neglecting to shrug, walking off alone, abandoning it like an elongated kitten that one has neither the time nor the patience for. As for the damage to the shadow itself, yes, I'm sure there was plenty of that. But it is difficult to see bruises on a totally dark object. In fact, what is a shadow but a nullity of substance, light, and information? As for the twins, I'm no expert at astrology, but it was clear to me they were born under the sign of Gemini. They had a certain air about them that convinced me I was right on this point. I decided to research that constellation, and so I discovered that the two brightest stars it contains are named Castor and Pollux, the twins of mythology who were born from an egg. Their mother was Leda, and she laid the egg after Zeus visited and ravished her in the form of a swan. This actually told me very little about the two girls, but then I had an inspiration. I was at home in my study. I dropped my pen and it rolled under the desk, and my arm wasn't long enough to retrieve it. I had no option but to move the desk, and to my relief this proved an easy task. The desk was mounted on little wheels. It rolled across the floorboards smoothly, accelerating towards the open door and the stairs beyond. I had visions of it crashing down the steps and smashing itself to pieces, so I held onto it and ran next to it. We were just like twins hurrying along a street, the important one mounted on casters, and never mind the Pollocks. Cancer. Walking along the beach, I understood that I'd gone in a complete circle around the island. There were the footprints I'd left behind when I set off. The tide hadn't yet filled them. This meant the island was rather small. But I already knew this, didn't I? I looked down at my bare feet and said, "The prints are those of a man wearing sandals." But let's not jump to conclusions. If one jumps in any way whatsoever on a beach, the prints will be even harder to interpret the next time you see them. The fact I wasn't wearing sandals now had little bearing on the issue. I might have worn them out on my circular walk, eroded them to nothing, exposing my toes shamelessly. The obvious way of finding out for sure would be to follow these prints and keep them under close observation. My idea was that gradually they would change into the prints of a man with bare feet. The process would be interesting to observe. Sandals aren't monstrous, and neither are feet, but some midway stage might be dreadful. The prints would resemble those of a demon. A beach demon. In this subtropical paradise, this isolated speck of land lost upon a mighty ocean, this refuge of the shipwrecked sailor, the castaway passenger, the lost and battered stowaway on a cruise ship. We all know many legends of the sea. Beneath the waves lurk mermaids and monsters. I followed the prints, and in fact I matched them step for step, my bare feet fitting easily into the indentations. It seemed I was wearing invisible and intangible sandals, but there was no one to see this, and even witnesses wouldn't have been able to form any important judgments about them. As I went along, I found myself admiring the person who had made the prints in a totally objective way. There was no hint of narcissism in this appreciation. The man who had made them was an abstract concept. I had forgotten my ego at some point on the sands of this second circumnavigation. And yes, the prints began to change, to melt at the edges, to lose confidence in the certainty they were sandals. But they didn't become more foot-like. On the contrary, I was dismayed to see them contract like pools of water draining through a hole in the world, but smaller until they were points. There were more of them too. At last they left the beach and veered inland, and so I followed them, walking sideways, almost scuttling, through the coconut palms and up the rocky slope of the extinct volcano at the very centre of the island. At the summit, I sat on a black boulder to catch my breath. A shipwrecked man must catch his own breath for every meal. The view was quite tremendous. It was shocking. The island was shaped exactly like a giant crab. It was threatening the ocean with its pincers. I looked at my reflection in the shiny obsidian, and what I saw was a body without a soul. Leo. That's a nice name, a name I have always liked. It's regal and strong, and yet there's something cute about it too. I imagine you like to be cuddled, especially at night. Too much cuddling and you'll snarl, and that will be amusing, because you won't bite at all, just pretend to. To ruffle your hair must be fun also. When you're caught out in the rain and shake your head, I bet the displaced droplets scatter far and wide. I could read a long book at night by the reflected shine from your perfectly white teeth. You're a wonderful person, I can tell this already. Thanks for the compliments. But you aren't entirely happy with my words? It's not that, oh no. You don't have an issue with compliments? None whatsoever. Yet you wish I hadn't spoken? Only because I'm wondering if it's entirely appropriate for my co-pilot to concern himself with such matters just before takeoff. If you'd waited until we were safely up in the air, I would think it less strange. Apologies, Captain. Call me Leo. Just a routine flight, of course, and completely uneventful. Up into the clouds and through them and over them. The aeroplane cast its shadow on the tops of banks of cumulus tufts, and I watched it hurry across that snowfield in the sky, my face pressed against the cold glass of the tiny window, and I wondered what would happen if the shadow decided to fly somewhere else, not to accompany us, but to diverge and land in some other land. Would our passenger shadows disembark there, or would they be unable to vacate their non-existent seats? Around the shadow of our aeroplane was a perfectly circular rainbow that rippled and undulated over the irregularities in the surface of the clouds, but never broke off, and always kept pace. It was charming. We all know there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, gold as yellow and dangerous as a healthy lion. But this rainbow had no end. It was sealed all the way around. Then we left all the clouds behind and flew over the savannah, and it was possible to see lions down there. They were the gold, and they were the pots that gripped the gold. Why was I flying to Africa at this time in my life? There's never a wrong time to do so, that's the answer. The lion that the constellation Leo is named after had nothing to do with Africa. It lived in Nemea in Greece, but originally fell from the moon. One must be very foolish and extremely tough to fall from the moon and land unscathed in a rocky country. But its fur was impenetrable. And now the aeroplane begins its long descent, and we are falling not from the moon, but sliding out of the blue, and Captain Leo is in full control, confident, majestic. Virgo. The purity of the untouched man or woman. We wonder if this is a dangerous condition. Avoiding life isn't really purity, but an amateurish rehearsal for death. The actors find it difficult to learn their lines. The old theatre is draughty and morosely decays. A building with weeds on the outer sills of all the windows. But that doesn't look too bad, to be honest. It gives the place a verdant charm. Some of the weeds are able to produce flowers that nod in the breeze. At some point, the wind chills itself seeking entrance. It scrapes off its warmth in the cracks. A leaner and meaner current of air remains to circulate horribly down the sagging passages of the vintage pile, that crumbling music hall where a drama society meets once a week to prepare for an opening night. I help to set up and control the lights. I am a volunteer. The play is a very old one. It's about unsullied women forced to marry conquering warriors. It is one of the most ancient plays in existence, but none of us know how to pronounce the name of its author correctly. On our lips, Aeschylus trips. I narrow the beam of a spotlight and illuminate the mouth of the director. You need to put more feeling into it, more feeling. He fans dust with the script. Glances are exchanged in a way that virginities can never be. Of all the plays the society might have chosen, why this one? A light modern comedy would have been a finer choice. There will be an audience anyway, of course, comprising the family and friends of the performers, just them. There's a hole in the ceiling directly above my head. I look up and see the sky. One of the magnifying lenses for the lights is resting by my side. I pick it up and hold it to my eye like an absurd monocle. Indoors, but I am outside. That's how decayed the roof is. The tiles have peeled away, as if time is an uncut fingernail and the theatre is a tangerine. I see a star, a single point of light, and with a frown I wonder if it is really a star. Not all stars are stars. Some are planets that only look like stars. My eyesight is sharp. It might even be an asteroid shining up there. This is highly unlikely, I know, but not entirely impossible. There are at least 2 asteroids that on rare occasions might be seen through binoculars from the surface of our own world, Ceres and Vesta. Both of them are named after goddesses. I feel intensely aristocratic as I remain with my monocle in place, and the director on the stage below rants his nonsense. Vesta above me, her virgins below, the Vestal virgins. But I am not at all like them. I lower the lens to the floor, unbutton my shirt and take it off. I fling it at the hole in the ceiling, and it passes through, caught by a gust like a sail. Off it goes on a most spontaneous flapping voyage, and I remain bare-chested in control of the lights, skin bristling, with no vest to cover the truth.
That was an excerpt from The Zodiacal Light, written by Rhys Hughes and read by Tom Newton. The Zodiacal Light is one of 3 sections in The 11th Commandment, a book of short fictions by Rhys Hughes. Recital Publishing, 2025. Hello, Rhys. Welcome to the Strange Recital.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me onto the Strange Recital. And I'm looking forward to answering any questions you care to put to me. So, here we go.
Great. Thanks for joining us here today, Rhys. And, Brent, do you still have those thumbscrews around?
Yes, I think they're in my car. Now, Rhys, we just heard an excerpt from your new book, The 11th Commandment. To be more exact, we heard an excerpt of the first part, The Zodiacal Light. There are 3 parts to the book. If I was to ask you to give a brief synopsis, I know it would be a question that doesn't make much sense, but could you give it a shot anyway?
Thank you. It's not the kind of book that can be easily turned into a synopsis. It's a collection of flash fictions. And these flash fictions have been grouped into 3 sets. So the first one, The Zodiacal Light. This is a story I actually wrote when I was working at the local university in 2018. In my spare time, when I had no official work to do, I would write. And this is one of the stories I wrote then, based on the signs of the zodiac. But also I wanted to add the 13th sign of the zodiac, the one that isn't recognized by astrologers, but is recognized by astronomers, because technically it is part of the zodiac, serpent bearer. So you've got 13 symbols.
Mm-hmm.
The second set of flash fictions is much looser. The frame around them didn't generate the ideas. And the third set of flash fictions, the Ostracove inclusion, in structure lies somewhere between the other 2. They're standalones and they're all connected in some way. A collection of flash fictions.
The full title of the book is The 11th Commandment and Other Very Short Fictions. There are, in fact, I believe, 88 stories in the collection, some of them very short indeed. What do you think of the advantages or disadvantages of fiction this short?
Oh, well, for me, the obvious advantage is that they are short, so they can be written in one go.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to kind of keep in mind some complicated plot twists. There's no risk of you running out of steam, running out of enthusiasm for writing them. They are these little fables, little meditations is the way I kind of think of them. I think of them as an ideas that are stated, and they are worked out in a sort of abstract way that kind of highlights paradox rather than traditional story structures with characters and character interactions. The interaction really is between the author and the reader only. There are only 2 characters. The disadvantage is readers who like plots and not really going to get extended plots. So if you really like to lose yourself in another world, don't go for flash fiction. If you like ideas that aren't necessarily worked out in a long extended way, but are stated and worked out in one way that suggests other ways without stating them, then go for flash fiction. That's all I can say, really.
You can tell from these stories that you obviously enjoy playing with the meanings or dual meanings of words, but it seems to me that one of the threads that tie these stories together is that they have some logical foundation. A logic runs through them all. It may be absurdist logic or logic taken in absurd directions. It makes me wonder if you didn't have some training in mathematics or engineering or science and took that intellectual discipline into fictional realms.
I mean, the stories are logical, absolutely logical. They tend not to be emotionally driven, but intellectually driven. Although I think there is some poignancy in some of them, especially the ones that play with nostalgia and with yearning and what the Portuguese call saudade, and what the Welsh call heraeth, almost like a homesickness. But it's a longing, a desire, perhaps for something that never really existed or something that never will exist. And as you say, they are very logical, but the logic isn't necessarily empirical logic or the logic of cause and effect. There are other kinds of logic, the logic of wordplay, the logic of ideas association. So in that sense, verbal logic, the logic of word association, is what's going to control the action of the story. So yeah, there's a lot of that. Logic is something I studied. I did study engineering and mathematics. And we had to do various kinds of logic. I did electronics engineering, Boolean algebra, which is logic, really. Other kinds of logic when I studied philosophy in my spare time. So I'm interested in logic. I'm interested in paradoxes. I'm interested in lateral thinking, lateral logic. At the same time, the idea isn't to be too technical, too dry, too academic. It's got to be about fun and amusement as well. But yes, I did have a scientific stroke engineering background.
Actually, to be honest, I knew you studied engineering. I gleaned it off the World Wide Web, but it seemed worth pursuing.
Well, I mean, I shouldn't really think of myself as an engineer because I haven't worked in engineering for a long, long time, although I have taught mathematics fairly recently. And of course, mathematics underpins most kinds of engineering, although lots of engineers seem to get by quite well without mathematics these days, especially. Yeah, it's something I can't. It's essentially essential part of my identity. I write fiction, but I didn't come up through the arts. I came up through science and engineering. That was simply because I didn't realize I had a choice at the time. But back then, pre-internet. I mean, it wasn't pre-internet. Of course, the internet was invented in 1969, but I didn't know about it. So, yeah, definitely felt that I had no choice. And it's too late now to worry about it, so I don't.
I think that was a good point, Brent, about the logical thread. It's the thread you follow out of the labyrinth, or better still, back into it. These stories for me feel like Mobius strips, where the inside flows into the outside and two planes are one. Mobius strips have always intrigued me, and reading your book, it was uncanny to find some common interests.
I was absolutely fascinated by Mobius strips as soon as I learned about them, and Klein bottles, and the fourth spatial dimension. And when I discovered the book Flatland by Edwin Abbott, it was amazing for me. This kind of written in the 19th century, but it's a science fiction story or a speculative story, but it relies more on mathematics and philosophy than it does on engineering. I know a lot of science fiction is really engineering based. This was based on mathematics, and a type of mathematics I hadn't encountered before. The whole thing about the Mobius strip and tesseracts and hyperspheres, and higher algebras as well. Just kind of, I find this more. They talk about the sense of wonder. For me, the sense of wonder doesn't come from spaceships that are 5 miles long or whatever. The sense of wonder for me is mathematics, logic, paradox.
Yes.
It amazes me that these things are comprehensible because they're so kind of counterintuitive in so many ways. Absolutely fascinated by them.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed about this book is your use of metaphors. By that I mean extended metaphors, a metaphor that goes off in unexpected directions. It was a term coined by the writer Pablo Lopez, derived from Alfred Jarry's idea of pataphysics. Did you make a conscious decision to use metaphors, or is it just how your mind works?
Oh, I love using metaphors and absurdly extended metaphors. Even before I knew what a metaphor was, I was interested in implausible metaphors. A metaphor is a sort of a logarithm, really. You convert a number into another number, and then you can do a complicated mathematical function more easily through addition rather than through multiplication. And then with an anti-logarithm, you turn it back into the result. And a metaphor is supposed to work like that, isn't it? It's supposed to compare something, and then you can extend the metaphor, and then you take it back, convert it back into the thing that it's meant to originally represent. Well, sometimes, or quite often, in fact, the thing that you've compared something to doesn't really match the original thing. So the extension kind of goes off on a tangent. And if you don't bring it back, if you just let it keep going off on a tangent, the story has changed. That's the metaphor, it's the conversion of the event by likening it to something that perhaps is slightly inappropriate, and then extending it has taken the story off in a new direction, it's changed the story. Yeah, I love that kind of thing. And I love all that kind of Oulipo techniques and all the stuff that inspired Oulipo, pataphysics of Alpha Jarry, and it's fantastic. It's playful. It's funny, it's intellectual, but without being pompous or pretentious, without being portentous even. And then using that to make something entertaining and amusing. And I find that some of these experiments, when they're not taken too seriously, produce absolutely delightful, light-hearted, comedic work that still has a rigorous intellectual core.
Yeah.
That's one. I mean, if you look at surrealism and the birth of surrealism and proto-surrealism, let us say, with Comte de l'Entremont, Isidore Ducasse and Molderot, Chant de Molderot. The whole thing about that was he was very dubious about metaphors. So he almost wanted to mock the use of metaphors. So he used implausible metaphors, And the famous one is as beautiful as the chance meeting upon an operating table of a sewing machine and an umbrella.
Right.
It's brilliant. It just shows the absurdity of metaphors. And in fact, Borges felt the same way. And he wanted to create a spoof literary movement called identism, in which objects are only ever compared with themselves. Because the only accurate comparison with anything is with that thing itself. It's playful, it's true, it's right, it's absurd, and it's amusing. And you don't have to take it seriously yourself. You don't have to say, because this is actually the case, I'm going to be very po-faced about it. It's got to be done in a light-hearted way, and we have to laugh at ourselves when we do it.
Yes.
As well as create something that is perhaps going to be laughed at in a nice way.
You are what might be considered a prolific author. How many books have you written now? 50? 100? And tell us something about your process. Are you constantly taking notes, jotting down ideas?
I have this thing where I'm a prolific writer because I am an obsessive writer. I'm not even actually an obsessive writer. I'm a compulsive writer. I have to write. If I have a few days without writing, I get edgy because I have ideas all the time. And these ideas have to be set down. They have to be enclosed or embodied in stories, otherwise they won't leave me alone. So if I don't have time to actually write a story, I will just write notes down. And that kind of gets them out of my system. I have lots and lots of bits of paper with stuff written on them. And some of these notes go back 30 years or more. If I don't write down the ideas, as I say, they stay in my head. And then they kind of get lost in this kind of soup with all these other kind of thoughts. And then eventually they'll come back and I'll have the idea again, the same idea, and think, okay, I had forgotten that idea, kind of, but it was there in my head all along. And now it's come back, and with increased urgency, I have to write it. So I'm a compulsive writer. That's all I can say, really.
Dare I ask what you're working on at the moment?
Oh, I'm always working on different projects at the same time. But I'll mention a novella called The Unfair Dinkum, which is about a library that lends out authors rather than their books. So it's set in the near future where people basically have stopped reading. They're not that interested in books, but they're still interested in celebrities. So they're more interested in the authors than they are in the books. And libraries changed to accommodate that, or rather this one library does. It's called the Living Library, and it lends out authors. And it involves an Australian writer who is fed up with being stuck on the shelf because he's not very popular and nobody comes in to borrow him. So one day he slips off the shelf, goes to the reception desk, and borrows himself. And that's how he gets out of the library. And he kidnaps the chief librarian, and they go off on an adventure looking for the unfair dinkum, and nobody knows what that is. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm almost halfway through this. After that, then I'm going to write the second part of a novel called The Inside Out Story. Last year I wrote a novella called The Garden Path. I was really, really pleased with it. I sent it to a publisher, and the publisher said, the length is a problem because the publisher only publishes longer works. As soon as he said that, I got an idea for a sequel. And I thought the sequel together will make one novel. So the sequel will be called The Front Door, and together they will be The Inside Out Story. After that, I'm writing a weird western called The Boomerang Gang. And I'm also writing a comedic spoof of spy stories. It's a novel called Average Assassins. So what's happened is I've been a short story writer for many, many years, and I am turning into a novelist. And I've made this decision. I wanted to write 1,000 short stories. I've done that, and I've exceeded it. Now it's time to become a proper novelist. I have lots of ideas for longer works. Again, they're sort of connected with each other. So yeah, just loads of stuff.
Well, thanks for talking with us, Rhys.
Yes, thank you. We'll do it again soon. And I should say that The 11th Commandment is out now and available from recitalpublishing.com, the usual digital platforms, and bookstores everywhere. An audiobook version will be available soon.
And before we go, let me try a little Welsh. Dydw I dim yn siarad Cymraeg mewn codiones, just yn esgus goned had you weithiau. Ydy chi'n siarad dau?
This is The Strange Recital, on the web at thestrangerecital.com. The music on this episode was an untitled improvisational composition by Felix, Tom's cat, who would walk up and down the keyboard in response to hand signals. This is episode 25071.